The nervous system includes the brain, which we now know includes the eyes as well, the spinal cord, and then what's called the peripheral nervous system, all the connections with the body. And every organ in our body, our heart, our diaphragm, our lungs, our spleen, our liver, all of it is as we say, innervated. It receives
Connected
nerve connections.
To the brain?
That's right, from the brain and spinal cord. So much so that if we were to just dissolve away everything except the nervous system, if we had a human nervous system splayed out here on the table in front of us, it would look like a human being. There would be a connection at every level down to, you'd be able to say that's the big toe, and that's the pinky, and that's where the heart would belong, because it's almost like a silhouette of our entire body. And so when we think about the nervous system, it's really important, I think, for people to understand that the nervous system is all of that, brain and body and all the connections back and forth. And there have been thousands of years of debates about what's the mind, what's the brain, et cetera, the mind-body problem, all that. I think it's fair to say that states of mind include the brain, the activity of the brain, and the body. Those two things coordinate, the brain and the body, and have a sort of what I call a contract. There's a brain-body contract that gives rise to things like states of mind. The brain does really 5 things. We have sensation, which is, we're constantly being bombarded with sound waves and light and smells and things. And that stuff is ongoing and you can't negotiate that. It's just you have these receptors in your body that allow you to evaluate those things. A sea turtle has magnetoreception. It can navigate by magnetic fields. Wow. We cannot do that, but they can because they sense it. Infrared vision in a pit viper or something. So unless you put on, night vision goggles, you can't do that. Then there's perception, which is which sensations you are paying attention to. So as you write with your pen, if I say, what does that pen feel like in your hand? Now you're perceiving it. But the sensation was always there. Those receptors were always sensing it. And then you have thoughts. And thoughts get a little complicated for us to parse because they are a little bit abstract. But thoughts are a combination of our perception, whatever it is we're attending to, and they have context, memory. They're tapped into our, into our memory systems, right? Because if I say a pen and you're like, I don't know what your relationship to pens is, but mine is kind of a trivial one. I write with one. But let's say I come from a family that, I don't know, had a pen factory in Germany in the 1930s. Then there's a whole...
Or you got stabbed by a pen.
Or you got stabbed by a pen, right. So it's very contextual. Yeah. So thoughts are like perceptions, but they carry memory and context.
Thoughts are memory and context.
Yeah, they include that. And then there are feelings/emotions. And this is where it really starts to get abstract and kind of hazy, and where there's still a lot of debate. Because, for instance, if I ask you how you're feeling and you say, most people say, I feel good. Well, what does that mean? I mean, that's not a feeling. So if you ever do personal development work, they're always like, don't say good or bad. What do you feel? And people will say, well, I feel calm and excited or something like, and it starts becoming very abstract. And so emotions are a real thing, and they certainly, perhaps more than anything else, recruit the brain and the body. When we feel depressed, we occupy certain postures, we feel it in our gut, we feel it in our limbs, we can feel fatigue, we can feel anxious, and so the emotions are really where you capture that mind, the brain-body contract and relationship very, very intensely. Okay. And then the 5th thing is actions. And what I love about actions and behaviors is they are very concrete. You're writing with your pen now, I'm speaking, I'm moving my hands. You can measure those things, you can analyze them, we know exactly what the neural pathways are. So we've got sensation, perception, emotions, and actions.
Thoughts, yep.
And then of course, beneath all that, you've got memories, and people always like to raise intuition. They always say, what about that 6th thing, intuition? And we could talk about intuition, but the reason I like to talk about states and the reason we study states in my lab is that states have 2 properties that are easy to study somewhat compared to emotions. And that's how pervasive they are, meaning how long-lasting they are. States tend to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, whereas emotions, it's sort of like they're more in combination. States are more like the primary colors from which you mix you get all the emotions. Yeah. And the other thing is that they have an intensity that we can measure. You can have a state of being very alert or very drowsy or asleep.
And you can say from a 1 to 10, how are you feeling in this state?
That's right. And we can measure
that experience.
That's right. And we can correlate it with things like heart rate variability, breathing speed, sweating, levels of neural activity in brain areas that control wakefulness. And so I will be the first to say that I would love to be able to say that in my laboratory we are studying, or someday we'll study, awe and flow and all those things. But those are higher up on the ladder than we can get to right now. I think with the current technology, we can understand states, and from there, I do believe that we can make a significant dent into certain mental health issues and optimize performance in certain, communities that are trying to optimize performance and in the general public. But the states that we're focused on are very concrete. For instance, alert and focused. That would be a wonderful state to understand and be able to direct ourselves toward when we're not feeling alert and focused.
How to get into that
How
state.
to get into that state. And we could talk about tools for that if you like. Sleep. Sleep is so powerful and so important. I think now people really understand the extent to which it's important, in large part because of Matt Walker's book, Why We Sleep, and the important work that he's done in his lab at Berkeley and many other labs as well, of course. So focus, sleep, creativity, stress. These are the kind of core states that we would like to tackle first because we believe we can. And then hopefully in my career, but if not in my career, then maybe one of my scientific offspring or another laboratory, 10, 20, 100 years from now, we'll be able to understand things like how does one get into a state of empathy? We could spend the whole hour talking about empathy, but it's hard and it's a fascinating topic and it's so important, but it's just very hard to understand at a neural level. So we're starting with the basics with the confidence that by understanding those basics, they will build up to richer representations and understanding of things like empathy someday.
Yeah. Would you need to be studying the heart as well to understand empathy, or does it all come from the mind?
It's a great question. So to understand any state, we believe that you have to study the brain and the spinal cord and the body. Wow. So in my lab, we talk about being neuroscientists. For me, that means we study the nervous system, the whole thing. So people who come into my laboratory, we put them into VR environments that simulate some experience. And I realize it's not as real as being in the actual experience in the real world, but you get enough presence, especially because it's very visually and auditorily rich in those environments. People get what's called presence. They forget that they're in a VR environment, at least for moments. And in that time, we're measuring heart rate variability, we're measuring sweating, we're measuring, in many cases, we also have electrodes lowered into their brain because we do this with neurosurgery patients. And so we have access to the brain, we have access to the body, and it's really by recording from all these areas of the brain and body that we can get a fuller understanding of what a state of, say, focus or stress or anxiety really is. If we were just looking in one little corner of the brain or just at the heart, we wouldn't be able to do that. And so that's a kind of a centerpiece of our lab, is that brain and body, the whole nervous system is the key. You got to look at all of it.
I want to ask you a couple final questions, Andrew. One is called the 3 truths. So imagine it's your last day on Earth, and you've actually accomplished you've gotten all your work out there in the world that you wanted to create.
Okay.
Your books, your lab results, all the research you got to do, 99% of it, right?
Okay.
You're always going to want to do more, but you got to do as much as you could.
Yep.
You have books out there, lectures, everything is out in the world that you wanted to do. But it's your last day, and you've got to, for whatever reason, you've got to take all of your work with you. So this podcast is gone, your books, your results, everything.
Wow.
So it's all gone with you to the next place, wherever you go. But you got a pen and a piece of paper, and you get to write down 3 things you know to be true about your entire life and the lessons you've learned that you would share with the world. And this is all we have to remember you by, or your lessons. I call it the 3 truths. So what would you say are your 3 truths?
Okay, well, the first one I'm going to poach from the Oracle, which is know thyself. I do believe that through whatever exploration, whether or not it's therapy, meditation, religious, exercise, all of the above, I think people should explore what they're, sort of how they're showing up in the world.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, based on today's discussion, I believe that we can make changes around that. But know thyself. Wish I had said it, but someone beat me to the punch. The second one is, it's rather Freudian, but I do think there's a core set of operations about the way we work that are important. You can imagine 3 boxes. It's like a 3-box diagram. And in the first one, it would say wish, and there's an arrow next to it. It would say anxiety, and then there'd be an arrow, and then the last one would say defense. Typically, we have a wish. It creates some anxiety in us, and then we get into some reflexive defensive behavior. For some people, that's addiction. For some people, that's rabid ambition to the point of neglecting things, whatever the defense is. And I think our job is to intervene between anxiety and defense, or at least come up with defenses that serve humanity, so that we're giving as opposed to destroying.
Yes.
Right? But I do think that wish, anxiety, defense is a big one. And then goodness. And then for the last one, a couple days ago I might not have said this, but I had an experience that leads me to say, I think, have fun.
Yeah.
Because it's the ultimate reset. It's not the only thing you want to do, but it's really tragic when people are so hard driving that they can't derive pleasure. And as we talked about today, the pleasure process is part of the renewal process, is part of the ability to be in greater pursuit.
Yeah.
And I think that when we're having fun, provided it's not at somebody else's expense, I think that it has a regenerative quality to it.